Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alexis Champion with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Mobile Advocacy Programs, How to Get Started and Keep Going. So again, my name is Alexis Champion, and I'm the training manager here at the Coalition, and this is my contact information. I'll have this available at the end of the presentation as well if you'd like to reach out to me for any questions. And I am thrilled to welcome Laura Horsley and Marci Chenoweth from Eve's Place, a program in Arizona that has a really innovative mobile advocacy program in place. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And in just a minute, I'm going to turn the controls over to them to share with us a little bit about how they got started and how things are going, and to answer any questions that you guys have. A little bit about Eve's Place. Their mission is supporting any victim of domestic, sexual, and teen dating abuse by increasing access to services through mobile advocacy. And like I said, they are in the West Valley of Maricopa County in Arizona, and they are here to tell us about their mobile advocacy program. And I strongly encourage you to check out their website. They have a great site with lots of information available, so you can learn more about them there in addition to what they're sharing today. So just to go over a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to them. If you can hear me now, if you could please raise your hand, and you will see there on the right-hand side of your screen in your control panel a little hand icon. And so if you can just click on that hand icon, that way I can know that you're able to hear and that you can find your control panel and kind of see all of your options over there. If you feel like you're having technical difficulties, it's best to contact the customer support. So this is their 1-800 number, 1-800-263-6317, or you can go to their website, support.gotomeeting.com. If you are having any audio problems, either choppy audio, if it's coming in and out, and you are listening over your computer speakers, we recommend that you dial in over the phone. And there you'll see under the audio tab on your control panel the call-in number and the access code that you can use to do that. Depending on internet speed, sometimes that's why the sound quality may not be as great listening over the computer. And so the phone should work better for you all. Okay, so I'm going to lower your hands. Thank you so much for raising those for me. I also strongly encourage you to type in any questions or comments you have during the webinar into the chat box that you see over there on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be checking for questions as our presenters are speaking. They're going to pause occasionally to check in to see if you have questions, and I'll also send questions to them as they come in. But please don't wait. If you have a question that comes up, go ahead and type that into the chat box. We will be sending out an email after the webinar with a survey and a copy of the slides, a handout version of the slides. We'd love to get your feedback. And this webinar is also being recorded, and so we will make the recording available to folks who weren't able to attend the live session today. I want to give thanks to the Georgia Criminal Justice Coordinating Council for providing funding for this webinar today. We can't forget our funders. And this is just a reminder slide, like I said, to anytime you have questions or comments to go ahead and type those into the chat box for us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Laura and Marci. Okay, you guys should be all set to go ahead and launch your slideshow, and attendees should be able to hear you.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Laura Horsley, and I'm the CEO of Eve's Place.
I'm Marci Chenoweth. I am the COO of Eve's Place.
And today we're going to talk about developing mobile advocacy in your community. So today, through the course of the next 60 to 90 minutes, we want to kind of walk you through the process of how to not only do mobile advocacy, define terms, but we also want to give you some tips on how to ask I'm sure all of our favorite funder, VOCA, for money to do some of these services that we're talking about. We actually created this program, and we call it Domestic Violence Mobile Advocacy Program, or DVMAP. That's a phrase it's a term that Marci and I have trademarked to give itself an opportunity to be recognized as a viable service for victims and survivors in our community. So,
hey, I'm going to pause you guys for a second. If you can look on your control panel, I'm not sure if the attendees can see your screen yet. You may have to accept to become the presenter. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Good. I'm so sorry. Yeah. All right.
I should have said that, so that's my fault.
No worries. Sorry about that. You didn't miss anything. It's just our names, and you'll see that at the end. So,
Great.
Thanks. So Eve's Place opened in 2004, so we're a relatively young program. They worked as a grassroots program from 2004 until 2007 when they hired the first employee, and that happened to be me, so I'm very fortunate to still be here and still be part of an amazing organization. In 2013, as an organization, we were looking at bed utilization was kind of questionable at times. Funding was starting to slip away, and we were just having to deal with all of the economic downturn, and we were really struggling with what we could do different and next. And so one of the things that we were looking at is a study that came out that said the majority of victims will not or do not ever access shelter. And so Eve's Place was founded as a gap provider. They wanted to do the things that other programs couldn't or didn't do. And so we started looking at how we might create some type of program for that majority of victims that do not actually access service. And so Marci and I one day sat down and started looking at how could we do that. And the overwhelming barrier that continued to come up was how are we going to allow or create an opportunity for people to access. And so that's kind of how the birth of the mobile program began. And so in 2013, our organization made a huge leap of faith and actually closed our shelter program. And we launched mobile advocacy as our primary and main service type. In 2015, we were very fortunate to ride the wave of the huge cap change in the VOCA funding, and we were able to expand our services not only in Maricopa County on the west side, but also to incorporate the entire county. So now we serve all of Maricopa County, which is over 1.4 million people. And then we were able to expand into a rural area. We chose a program that is in the southwest corner of Arizona, providing services not only in Quartzsite, but its surrounding areas. And then we also wanted to look at what would this model work, how would this model work in a tribal setting. And so we're very fortunate to have the largest reservation in our state, the Navajo Nation. And so we selected that as our tribal location. And that was all done in 2015 as a way to really test this model and see if it was able to do what it had done in the Maricopa County area, in a rural and in a tribal setting. And then in 2016, last year, we were fortunate to be able to expand services again to now increase mobile legal services or legal advocacy, and also to add youth services to those services provided. Just to kind of give you an idea, in 2013, when we were a shelter-only program, we'll talk a lot today about VOCA because I understand that a lot of you are waiting for the proposal to be out and hoping to use some of their funding. We were only getting a little over $54,000 for our shelter support dollars. In 2015, when we started looking at being more mobile and we had been through a year of trial and error, they increased those funding dollars just a little bit. But in 2016, they funded us at $923,732 to really test this model as a mobile concept. And then in 2017, we were just raised again to $1.67 million to expand our expansion programs. So they really see the value of bringing access points to people no matter where they are. So this next slide is just to give you a little bit of an idea. Mobile advocacy has been something that we've been playing with since 2012. We actually launched a very, very, very small component of this program, even before we launched it as a full-blown agency-sponsored program. And so part of what is happening in Arizona is they're seeing the efficiency of this model. And so a lot of changes are taking place in our state. And so one of the things that has happened is our Arizona Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence created a best practice manual several years ago, and they wanted to really update it to be more indicative of the new and more innovative program styles, utilizing housing first models and some of those things. And one of the things that was really great is that we were asked, and Marci in particular was asked to sit on the committee to develop the mobile advocacy component of the best practice standards. And what was interesting about that is that she ended up writing it because nobody else really had the same type of mobile services that we were providing in the same type of setting. And we'll talk about today what that actually looks like. We've been asked to do some consulting and training in Arizona and other states as a lot of people are realizing that brick and mortar is not the only way to provide service. And now we're dealing with our database system in Arizona. The VOCA applications created a lot of new changes in the reporting structures. And so our database that Arizona has been using for the past 15 years, even though he's been trying to keep it caught up with the changes in the trends, it really wasn't tracking mobile because it was really, again, shelter-centered. And so we were asked to sit in on the database development team to really make sure the data was being captured through the mobile program and then fed into those appropriate categories. We're really excited to be considered the Partner of the Year for Peoria Police Department. That is not our hub city, and so they're seeing the value of our advocates working in conjunction with their police department victim advocate unit. They can do the immediate short term, and then we pick up the longer term and some of those peripheral services that they cannot. In the course of the last 2 years, we've been through some tremendous growth. We've tripled and quadrupled in size in some locations, and in 2 years we've now expanded to 4 states. And so we're providing services in more diverse settings. We've been asked to talk at keynotes at an international conference, primarily targeting Aborigine or indigenous people. And so our work on the tribal setting was really paramount in some of those things. One of the things that the mobile setting does as well is it helps form partnerships that may or may not be usual. And so in our rural and tribal areas, we've been able to do some amazing things. In our rural program, we were given a free building by their city to utilize for the victim services component. And the Navajo Nation now considers us a certified and official provider of their nation. And so recognizing that this model does bring a value that did not exist just 2 years ago. And so I'm very excited about being able to be part of that process.
Hey Laura, this is Alexis. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to check in and see if you had advanced a slide on your end. We're still seeing the Eve's history slide.
Oh gosh, yeah, I did. I don't know why we're not able to show that.
It just changed just now. Now I'm seeing what is mobile advocacy at the top.
Okay. Yeah. All right, great. Sorry about that.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. We're just going to talk a little bit about what exactly is mobile advocacy. Many years ago, at the beginning of our domestic violence movement, the community at that time did such a great job convincing everyone and educating everyone that shelter was such a need. And now we kind of feel like it's our generation to enhance those services and expand to this mobile type of program service. And so when we were talking to the community, we're talking about mobile advocacy or for those victims who do not need or want to go to shelter. So a lot of times our victims may still be with their abusive partners, or they may no longer have the need for shelter because the perpetrator does not have any stalking tendencies or anything like that, and so shelter is not necessarily going to be a requirement for them. We also look at mobile being where the advocate and the client is both mobile. So we pick the client up in safe and confidential locations where they feel comfortable, where they feel like they can get to, and then we take them to places that they feel like they need in order to access services, food stamp offices, employment agencies, those kinds of things, or just various locations so that we can meet them wherever is going to be convenient and safe for them. It also bolsters the idea of the individual aspect of a case plan so that we can really individualize the program to meet that individual client, her family, what's going on with them, what kind of services they may need, because we are reaching, again, that 75% of the victims who do not access shelter services. That's our population. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach out to. And again, we're looking at the before, the during, and the after stages of the victimization. So a lot of times we're working with victims who are still with their abusive partners, so we're talking about orders of protection, we're talking about what an emergency custody order would look like. Some of our victims then decide they're ready to leave, so we're there to help them set that up, help them walk them through that process, safety planning, and those kinds of things. Our passengers, our mobile advocate clients, are really anyone who is in need of service. Primarily looking at VOCA, you do have to look at, they have to be the victim of that crime. So we can look at sexual assault, trafficking, undocumented, LGBTQ, men, anybody who is in need of services is really going to be somebody who can access this program because, again, it is individualized. We're not looking at bedroom situations or bathroom situations or any of those kinds of things, and so that accessibility is definitely increased. We also do provide teen dating violence support to those teens who are primary victims of abuse. So that is definitely something that if you're interested in adding to your program, that we would highly recommend. It is such a great service. But you know, each of these options are available. So just talking to your own program to see what your primary client is going to be for you.
Okay. Are there any questions that anybody wants to talk about at this point in time before we progress?
Did we get the slide moved over? Are we?
We're still looking at the what is mobile advocacy slide. Is that the correct one? There we go. Now we're seeing who are our passengers.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So hold on one second. So those are our passengers. So we're looking at primary victims, secondary victims, all again VOCA, trafficking, undocumented, LGBTQ men, all of that I just mentioned. Sorry about that.
Great.
I'm not technically savvy over here. All right.
Yeah, and just a reminder for folks to type in questions into the chat box as they come up, and I will check on those. I think we're good.
Okay.
Did you see the change in the screen?
Yes, now we're seeing speaking mobileese.
Yeah. All right, so this section here is just kind of giving you a little bit of the terms and language that we're going to talk about throughout the day. A lot of times we want to know what the difference is between a community-based setting and a mobile setting. Our definition of that is going to be a community-based setting is one that is an office building where we're requiring our victims and our survivors to come to us. Generally, there's a personal vehicle is being utilized by the staff person, and transportation of a client is limited or not offered. And again, the mobile advocacy we're looking at where the advocate travels to the client into the community, and many times we pick them up in safe locations and take them to a meeting location that we feel in order to have our session with them, or pick them up and take them to our support group and bring them back. And then again, both the advocate and the client are mobile. DES, that's one of the terms that we'll use. That's one of our Arizona state funders. VOCA, of course, we all know that four-letter word we love to hate. And then, of course, partner sites and community partner. A partner site is going to be somebody that you're going to reach out to, and they're going to provide an in-kind space. Generally, that's going to be because we're going to ask, can we use this room every Tuesday night for our support group? Could I have that, you know, office for every Wednesday morning for any one-on-ones I might need in this area? Those kinds of things. A community partner is going to be somebody that we talk about is going to be a collaborative partnership. Generally for the purposes of a referral or collaboration in the community, so we're looking at our victim advocate in the police department, those kinds of things.
Okay, so before you start your engines and fully launch into what the most exciting part of your new program, There's some convincing that has to happen, and so you're going to need to talk to your community and start getting them ready to hear about new services. You're going to have to talk about this with your staff. Sometimes it's very difficult for the staff to make change and to think about other ways of doing things. We all get used to what's comfortable and what we know, and sometimes it's very difficult for staff and program people to really move and make those transitions easily. The other thing that you want to think about is talking to your board. I know in Arizona we were expected to have our board on board, if you will, with our changes, and so it was very important that from every aspect of our program, we were looking at truly changing the way that we viewed and the way that we define services for our own agency and for our own individual clients. And so it's real important to have your board excited and on board with you when you're moving forward. And then most importantly, you cannot stress enough, having those preliminary conversations with your funders, or at least being able to communicate what the changes will do and what those will bring to your agency, and not only to your agency, but to the victims and survivors that you're serving every single day. So making sure that everybody that you touch in your community is really kind of educated and knowledgeable about what your changes are and what those new things look like. Okay, so just some basic things, ways to start the conversation with whomever you decide to tackle first. We're hearing from people we serve that, and you can kind of go into that we need more options, that we don't just want to be in shelter, we want to do other things. We've been thinking about ways to reach more people by creating new and innovative programs, coming up with a new positive spin. This model can be more efficient and cost-effective because, and we'll give you some even better feedback on that later on in the presentation about how you can use this as an argument. There are other programs providing mobile services. They are finding that. And so that was something that was very helpful to us, that this was something that other people were talking about. People were doing it in a community-based setting, and we wanted to take it to the next level. And so that was very helpful as a lead-in. And so next, we'll begin to provide you with some data that should help you win and convince people that this is the right thing to do. So we did a little comparison we call walls versus wheels. Walls being stationary or residential type programs or community-based programs where victims and survivors are expected to come to the program for service. Some of the things that we found when we were doing that particular model was that our capacity was limited to the number of beds or the number of slots that we had available. Accompaniment was limited. We found that we could not really truly help an individual through an entire court process because we had other clients to think about. We had other residents to think about. A lot of the time we had to triage and be crisis motivated, so picking and choosing how we defined which person got to go if we couldn't transport both people needing to go a different place at the same time. And then having only one access point for services. And so not everybody could come to shelter to go to support group. Not everybody could come to the shelter for some of those other things. And so those were some of the things that created that limit that we saw. And so what the mobile program does, though, is the capacity now becomes only limited by hours and distance. So we don't have a bed capacity. We don't have an outside limit of how many people. And we've found that that really has been helpful for our victims and survivors. We've been able to increase our accompaniment. We can actually follow a client from start to finish through a court process. If it takes her 8 hours to go from one place to another to get an order of protection, that advocate can schedule that entire 8-hour time with that client and provide that one-on-one direct service time. So it's really creating a continuum of care. It's giving that individual support from step one to step whatever is at the end of her journey. And so that's been a real definite positive. And then the wonderful thing about this mobile program is that it creates unlimited access points for service. We can literally meet a person anywhere. And so I can't tell you how much more beneficial that is when a person doesn't have to get someplace, doesn't have to worry about, is that on the bus line, is that available by taxi? And so those are some of the things that we've really noticed as positives.
Continuing with the walls versus wheels kind of conversation, again, when we had our shelter, as Laura mentioned, it was a 25-bed capacity, and our state funding only allowed us to provide those services for up to 4 months. Whereas in our mobile program, the duration or the longevity in our program is really determined by the client. They can let us know, I just need a phone call once a week just to check in with somebody, or I would like to see you every week, or, you know, let me just come to group once a month, and that's all the support that I'll need. And so it's really up to them to kind of determine that. Again, looking at that customizable aspect of the mobile program, where we can do one thing with one client and not offer that to another if that's not in their case plan. For example, we have, you know, a lot of kids or clients who want to go to the park and have their session while they're out walking or doing something like that. That's something we were able to do in this model, whereas in the residential shelter, we kept having to, you know, well, if I can't make one happy, or if I can't make everybody happy, I can't make the one. And so we had to pick and choose back then. And of course, accompaniment, as we can accommodate a very diverse population now, as we mentioned earlier. In our program in the shelter, we had a women's only kind of aspect before we did start allowing some men into our shelter on a limited capacity. But mobile, it really does not matter. Transgendered, men, women, elderly, and none of that matters as we're able to accommodate such a diverse population. And then we're able to satisfy a multitude of needs and kind of make that flexibility happen for that client. So again, it's very individualized. We really kind of let the client lead and let them know what it is that they need from us, and we follow suit. So, are there any questions about any of that before we move on?
Yes, we did have one question from one of our attendees about asking if you provide culturally specific programs. I think you've talked about that a little bit in reaching out to tribes, and as you just explained, you know, being able to accommodate a diverse population because you're not limited to shelter. But I didn't know if you had any other thoughts on that question about culturally specific programming.
Sure. In our Navajo Nation, all of our staff and advocates are Navajos as well. We do have Navajo speaking advocates as well, so that they can communicate with anybody that is in need. And then, of course, being in Arizona, Spanish-speaking population is heavy here, and so we do have most of our staff is bilingual to accommodate that. And so, you know, the staff is just as diverse as our clients.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, so miles per gallon, cost efficiency of running mobile. So this actually even kind of surprised me too when we were preparing our PowerPoint. And so when we were in shelter, the last year that we actually did shelter only, that was in fiscal year 2012 for us, we were operating at $77 a day. That happened to be one of the high-end years for us. Our rates, as do probably in every program, fluctuate from year to year with funding and beds and all of those different things. And so our rate ended up fluctuating between $48 a day and then to this high end of $77. The reason it was $77 a day was because utilization was starting to fall off. We were across Maricopa County, programs were having empty beds, and we were all worried about what was happening. Were we doing something that was creating this difficulty in people accessing shelter? And so just to give you a comparison, in 2015, when we were into full swing, had all of our staff members on board, our daily cost per person was only $3. So definitely a strong selling point when talking to funders, when talking to community, and when talking to your board. It certainly does create a little bit less strain on your fundraising requirements, and so certainly it's something to think about. Now, this $3 a day is definitely on the low end because we were a lot more efficient in 2015 than we were in 2012 and 2013 when we were just beginning this process. But even during those times, the highest amount we've ever had to incur in a daily rate was $6. So it really does change how you look at the services that you're providing, and what you can provide to people is just as important as it was in shelter, but at a fraction of the cost. Just to kind of keep on with the next part of the slide, the service types. If you look at in shelter in fiscal year 2013, again, when we were just doing our shelter staff and shelter programming, Our budget was $698,000. We had a very small program, 25 beds. In mobile in 2015, we had a $660,000 budget just before the boom in VOCA funds. But if you look at the group hours on the shelter side, we only provided 403 hours of group. As you know, or at least in Arizona, our groups have to be voluntary, and it was very difficult to motivate folks to go to group. Our group hours in mobile were over 1,000. And so making sure that you realize that these people want to come, they want to be part, they're the ones that drive the process, and so we're really seeing a significant amount of participation. Our legal advocacy hours were only 42.75 in 13 during shelter time, and those increased to over 359 hours through the mobile program in 2015. So you can see there's just a real huge change. We can actually now cater the programs to meet the needs of the individuals.
I did just notice a typo though while we're talking on there. It was a 2012 was that bottom line, but go ahead. Sorry.
So moving along to the miles per hour slide, we're looking at contact hours in shelter for calendar year because it was difficult to make it all jive with fiscal years and then all of those changes. And then VOCA changed their fiscal year to a federal year midstream, so we found it easier to kind of look at it from a calendar year standpoint. In looking at calendar year 2012, we had 8 staff members, 25 beds. They provided 2,080 hours of direct service time to clients. That was operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In the mobile program in 2016, we had 1 staff with a capacity of up to 40 people on her caseload, and she provided 1,482 hours, which is over half of what it took 8 staff members to do in the previous shelter program. And that was working 8-hour days, 5 days a week, or 344 days a year. So definitely a change in how financially that looks over the course of time. And then at the bottom, just to kind of give you a comparison, we had to have 12 shelter staff to operate a 25-bed program because of the 24/7 capacity, and a total of about 233 to 250 clients per year. 12 mobile staff members at 40 clients per year. If they only had 40 each, that would be over 1,380 clients per year served. So you can really see the significant difference in the numbers of victims and survivors who can be served in this mobile program with the exact same number of resources. Any questions or comments about that?
Yeah, and you may, I can't recall if you addressed this later on, but we had one question about if you no longer have a shelter at all, what do you do in situations where a survivor is in need of a confidential location or needs to escape a dangerous situation physically?
Okay, I can certainly address. Sure. Well, so we have a couple of things. In Maricopa County, there are multiple shelter programs. We were not the only one. And so we actually assist clients in getting to those shelter programs through our mobile advocacy. So that's one of the ways that we work on that. So if our clients have to be transported to shelter, then we help them do that. One of the things that changed in Arizona about 2 or 3 years ago is we went to a central intake process in Maricopa County where there's one intake program and they manage all the beds for the entire county. So we could not pick and choose who came into shelter and who didn't. They're all randomly assigned by the central intake program. In the rural and tribal programs, it's basically the same thing. We did not actually ever operate shelter programs in those locations, but we partner heavily with our peer groups in those locations to provide that transport. And in fact, we're getting more people to safety by providing that mobile advocacy process of getting them from wherever they may be on the reservation to that only one existing shelter location, or in the rural area as well. There's one shelter in that particular area, and our mobile advocates can bring those clients in from any of our access points into that shelter program. So it's actually opened up the process a little bit more. It's certainly helpful in Maricopa County to not have been the only provider of that service. And we certainly do not advocate that shelter should not be in existence. We truly do believe that there are and will always be a need for them. We just feel like this is a wonderful enhancement program for that service.
And so one of the things that we would recommend as you are developing your program is to really reach out and find and partner heavily with your shelter programs if you do choose to go through this model, so that you can have that quick response from somebody and say, hey, I'm from Eve's Place, I have a client here, she's in need of shelter, can I bring her to you, can we get her in? And that's generally how we do that, or we do relays as well. We'll take them from one shelter to another if that's a situation that is need. And then, of course, as you know, with VOCA funds, we are allowed with some emergency financial assistance. So if all of the shelter beds are full and there's that situation, or because of distance or relocation or any of that, we do put them up in a hotel for a minimum days just to get that immediate safety under control, and then we will kind of reassess and evaluate the situation with each client as we go. Yeah. Okay, but great question, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I know that transportation is a huge challenge here in Georgia. We have some shelter programs that are very rural and very spread out, far away from each other or from central locations or cities. And so I think that's an excellent point to consider when looking at something like this, is how it opens up additional resources, in fact. So.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it creates a channel and a way for people to access that never existed before, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. All right, so we're putting the wheels in motion. We're ready to get started. We've convinced everybody that this is the right thing to do, and so we want to consider some things before we actually get on the road. So what kind of services we want to offer, what is the staff makeup going to look like? A lot of times people ask us, how do you deal with confidentiality? How do you deal with safety? And then the logistics and the details. So we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of some ideas on how to develop your own policies and procedures if this is a model that you choose to go with. Okay, so here's a list of some services that we provide, of course, including but not limited to. And for those of you who already have VOCA, you'll see very recognizable VOCA terms. And so we're looking at crisis intervention, safety planning, like I mentioned earlier, emergency hotel for those situations where shelter is there or residence is needed. We do offer legal services. Again, as Laura mentioned earlier, in one of our legal expansions, we have been able to hire an attorney. So now we do have an attorney who's able to represent the victims who need that support. We can take them to court. We have another advocate who will provide child care for the kiddos while they're waiting in the lobby. And so just, again, a full range of support. We have advocates to provide the emotional support that the clients will need. This still is the primary service that you'll see in this program model. Emotional support is still 100% of what our victims are needing. So support groups, individual counseling, goal setting, all of those kinds of things. Personal advocacy, you'll see we're talking with our DCS, which is our Child Protection Agency. I'm not sure if you guys call it CPS or HRS out there, but those kinds of agencies that we can work hand in hand with. Of course, transportation, that's going to be the huge selling point on this model for our victims and survivors, is that we're able to transport them to and from and go with them to that process, sit there with them while they're talking to that food stamp caseworker, getting their services, helping them understand that paperwork because you sat in that meeting with them, and then kind of follow through that continuum of care through that process with them. And then, of course, transportation to and from shelter, those shelter relays that we talked about. We have a shelter 2 hours north of us that calls frequently so that we can transport or pick up clients from their program and transport them down here to Phoenix to a shelter here. And so we're able to provide that relay as well. And then, of course, basic needs. This is not VOCA eligible, though, for those of you who are contemplating the VOCA grant that's coming up. But that is something that we can offer, you know, food boxes, toiletry, clothing, all of those needs that we were able to provide in shelter, except for the bed night, is still able to be accessed in this mobile program. So all of these service deliveries are still offered. And then, of course, our mobile radio, just different ways that we are able to communicate with our clients. Again, it's all led by them. And so if they want to meet us face-to-face once a week, then that's what we do. Some of our clients are only able to access us via email or via phone. So maybe they're just calling us during their lunch break, whatever is safe and convenient for them. Or some of we have an advocate here now who meets with her client during her lunch break, and they go for a walk every day, and they just walk the grounds of her office building, and they talk, and they safety plan, and they talk about what it would be like if she chose to leave. We offer that support. We inform her of her rights. And again, that flexibility is able to be there for those victims, and again, who aren't needing or wanting that shelter service, but we can communicate in various ways with them in this model as well. Any questions about the communication? Of course, for the confidentiality, we'll get into that a little bit too, but all of our email is encrypted. We have various policies in place to protect the phones, and all of our numbers are blocked and those kinds of things as well. Okay, so we'll move on.
So, designated drivers. So something to think about. This is not for the faint of heart. This is a very physical and demanding and draining position. So you got to know your staff. It's imperative. We cannot stress enough that the advocates that you have to hire in this particular model are very different than the individuals that we were hiring to work in our shelter program. So the people that are our advocates, they have to be motivated and trustworthy. They have to be able to be outgoing, to build rapport not only with their clients, but also with their community partners and those community sites. They have to be able to access other resources in each of their communities. And so really being outgoing and being able to walk in and pick their flyers and their brochures and their business cards and saying, my name is Susie, and here's what I want to talk to you about today, and here's how you call. They have to be creative and be able to think outside the box. They absolutely have to be able to work with minimal supervision and to be able to take initiative. They're making decisions every day in the field as they're out there working with their individuals. They have to be flexible. Every day is different, and we thought that in shelter, but this is even more flexible requirements because you may think you have a full day scheduled and you get a call first thing in the morning that completely changes everything about your scheduled day. And so really thinking about those types of character traits and personality traits as you're interviewing and hiring for these mobile advocates. And I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to stress how much driving these individuals do. We say the word driving at least 12 times in our employment interviews because we really want to stress that they practically live in these vehicles. There is an awful lot of time that they're spending in traveling to and from clients and then traveling with clients, and so all of that is regarding driving, and so they absolutely have to know and be willing to do that. And they have to be knowledgeable. We can't start with beginner DV advocates. These are people that have to have at least intermediate skill because they're out there and they're having to deal with people on their own with no other people around them and no other staff to assist them, and management people only being available by phone, text, and email. And so it really is a very different process in hiring and thinking about who you're employing as mobile advocates.
All right, so we're going to go into our tinted windows, our confidentiality section here. Again, this is often asked when we're talking to the community about mobile advocacy, but our confidentiality really is individualized. It's going to be based on the client and what's going on in their family and with their abusive situation, because not all the clients are going to have stalking or current abusers. Some of our clients have not had contact with their abusive partner for months or so, and so that may not be an issue as far as the confidentiality when you're looking at your partner sites where you're going to be meeting them. You're looking at either public locations or private locations. For example, sometimes we'll pick a client up and we'll take them to the library. Again, it's not going to be a safety concern. Nobody's following them. The confidentiality, we have just two women sitting at a table in the library just speaking quietly about their day and things that are going on, versus somebody who does need to be safe and secure in a more confidential way. And so we utilize our thrift store has a office in the back, and so the client looks as though she's going shopping and she's really meeting our advocate in the back office. And so you really have to depend on what's going on with your client on how you're going to handle the confidentiality regarding them. You're looking at or even looking at meeting in your vehicles, if that's going to be, especially in our rural and tribal areas where it's not easy to just, drive down the street to to a local library or to a partner site. So meeting in a vehicle is definitely an option. We specifically chose minivans or large SUVs so that we could have that flexibility within the vehicle to sit there and talk and safety plan or drive around if you need to. So again, just being flexible with that confidentiality. You're also going to be looking at your equipment, the types of equipment that you're going to be using. We do have locking totes. So these are just little desks on wheels, as we call them. They do have a combination lock, so all of the client's information is locked in that tote as it's in the vehicle to being transported to and from our main office. Then when it's brought into the main office, it then goes into the client file. So none of that remains in the vehicle for as long as we can handle. So you just want to have policies in place again with their cell phones, communication, your emails are encrypted. For example, on our cell phones, we only do first names only, no last names, those kinds of things. And then, of course, with documentation, we do have some special forms in place so that we can keep our information confidential, policies on those forms, on how you're transporting them. You want to think about some of those things as well. All right, any questions on the confidentiality before we move to safety? Those are usually the tough ones.
Yeah, and I think you might discuss this on this next slide, but just clarification that you do have, advocates are not using their own personal vehicles.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, we do, there are still some programs here in Arizona that just unfortunately, just based on funding, have not been able to purchase agency vans based on insurance and those kinds of things, which is completely understandable. But if you're able, we do recommend that you use agency vehicles to enhance that advocate safety. Again, one of the things that, lessons learned that we were not expecting in this program model when we first launched, but the staff in the agency are at much more of a risk for safety than when we were in shelter. We had locking doors, some of us have barbed wires, some of us have security on site, and so when you're mobile, you're truly exposed, and so making sure that your safety planning with your staff and your agency on what that looks like, what you'll do if you have a lockdown procedure on site, how your staff member will handle those situations, looking at the risk, the danger assessment that you do with your clients so that you can evaluate and discuss those things. Again, looking at your communication with management is vital, so management can kind of stay abreast of red flags with a victim, how are we going to keep the staff and the agency safe when we are being mobile. We do recommend having 2 staff available if possible, so that if you do have maybe even a client who is a little bit more of a risk or an abuser that may be stalking, that you have 2 staff available to kind of transport or be with in that mobile setting, so that you just have an extra pair of eyes and ears for a safety measure. Again, training you want to look at, keeping on top of safety training, especially with the cyber stalking and technology. We do have a really great mechanic here in town, and he takes a look at some of our client vehicles to look to see if they have any GPS trackers in them. And so we just want to make sure our staff is up to date on any of those kind of mechanisms. We do a phone screen, and we talk about safety planning when it comes to what kind of cell phone the client has. Whereas an Android, you can take the battery out and you cannot track it, but an iPhone, that is not possible. And so we're just trying to stay on top of that as much as possible. So as I tell the staff frequently, we're in the business of safety, and that does not just mean your client. You do need to put some measures in place to make sure that your staff and your agency program are now staying safe.
Did we address all the questions, or are there any other questions that we have not touched on?
No other questions at this point.
Great.
All right, so we're just going to go into some travel tips and lessons that we've learned along the way. We do recommend that you're talking to your insurance company, again, so that you can add that availability to transport clients in your agency vehicles. One of the things that we have done as well when we have launched our youth program, it is still kind of in its infancy stage, but when we launched that, we did go to our insurance provider and ask them, what would an unaccompanied minor look like in our agency vehicle? How much is that going to cost us? And so just making sure you're having those open dialogues with your with everybody that's involved with your agency. Even if you can get your staff to go to driving school, you may be able to decrease your cost on that. Your work week, one of the things that we've instituted, because your staff is out of the office the majority of the time, and you want to encourage them to be out of the office the majority of the time, we do have a 4-day work week, and Friday is a no client contact, with exceptions, of course. If there's a court date or a crisis that comes up, we do make those exceptions. But primarily, we see our clients Monday through Thursday, and then on Fridays, that's our staff day. This program model does tend to be a bit lonely for the staff, and so that Friday day is the time for us to do some team building, some training exercises, and it's also, of course, the day that they'll get all their paperwork done, because the rest of the time they're out driving and transporting with clients, and so Fridays is their documentation day. One of the other things that we do recommend is 2 is better than 1, so if you are able, we do recommend going for funding for at least 2 mobile advocates, or at least 2 positions, even if it's just an advocate and maybe an aide or something like that. This gives some flexibility, like we talked about with the safety. If you're able to do 2 advocates, you have that diverse choice. That would be one of the drawbacks of this program model. Where in shelter we had multiple staff, so our clients could come in and they would maybe have a really great rapport with one staff member and not such a great rapport with another. In this program model, that does not tend to happen, where you are assigned an advocate, that is your advocate. But if you can have 2 advocates, that's great. So if a client comes to you and says, you know, I'm not really jiving with my advocate, I really would like someone else, you can offer that diversity by having a second person in your pool. Marketing, that was something that we definitely learned. You want to make sure that you're putting in a very large marketing budget. Again, we are re-educating the community. We are re-educating the victims on resources that are available. And so you're going to be making copies and flyers and brochures and passing out business cards. We have gone through more business cards and flyers than we ever have, probably in the combined 10 years of our shelter experience. So making sure that you're putting out that marketing, because you want your community, you want your partners, you want your victims in the community to know who you are and that what you can do, again, because shelter tends to be the first thing that people think of, and so we're just re-educating. You're going to be the other thing that we've talked about too is a central intake process. That's really going to be where we have one phone number that we have advertised, and all of our calls go through that one number. That phone screen is completed just to maintain eligibility. And our program specifically, in order to be eligible, you just have to be a victim, whereas other programs may have other restrictions that they may want to put in place. But that one central intake, that one phone call that comes into that one person who answers the phone really does give you some kind of quality assurance. It also makes sure that you're able to assign that client to an advocate that's going to best meet their needs. Looking at where I have here assigning zones, what that means is, you know, we have a very large area that we cover. So we have advocates who generally work in these 3 cities, and another advocate who generally works in these 3 cities. And so as callers call in, we know that someone from Peoria is generally going to be assigned to Advocate Sally, because that's her general area. That's going to maximize their efficiency when they're traveling to various clients. It's going to encourage them and allow them to become very knowledgeable of that community's resources. And so we do recommend, you know, kind of assigning general locations. Of course, things come up, and that may not always be the case, but that would definitely be a recommendation that we would offer. We would also like to offer, you know, boundaries in this setting. It is a lot easier to cross those boundaries between an advocate and a client, and so making sure that you're putting some policies in place based on how you feel comfortable and with your staff members. One of the things that we started off doing was allowing meetings to happen in food places like McDonald's or Burger King. One of the lessons that we learned was that was not such a good idea. It did kind of make the advocate feel as though she had to buy something not only for herself but for the client. So again, we're crossing those boundaries. You're picking a client up and you're going for those walks in the park, so the client may start to feel more like a friend than a professional. So you just want to kind of make sure you have those boundaries in place and keeping those policies to where you're comfortable and your staff can maintain that. Any questions about any? I know that was a lot of information.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know if you have any recommendations or how you handle staff supervision, not just like, clocking in and out kind of supervision, but one thing that here in Georgia we've been training on is we've been doing trauma-informed training is sort of a reflective supervision process. And I was just curious, I love the idea that you have Fridays set aside to kind of touch base and do training and things like that, but it seems, as you describe, that it can be lonely, that there can be challenges with boundaries, if, sort of offering that time for the reflective process for advocates to kind of, talk about feelings that have come up, or so just curious to hear your thoughts or your approach to that side of the work.
We do have a couple of things in place where we do have, of course, our monthly supervisions with our staff members where we kind of do that check-in. Of course, that would be recommended regardless of your program model, but definitely keeping on check with them. We do offer a daily communication report that we ask our staff members to do because we have so many staff, and so we have over 200 clients at this time, and so I can't really keep up with who is a higher risk client versus who is not a higher risk client. And so a daily communication report is requested of our staff members where they do send an email at the end of their shift kind of notifying their manager of who they saw, what they accomplished, and then the most important piece is their projection for the next day. They let me know they're going to be meeting with Sally at 1 o'clock at the Phoenix Library. That just kind of gives me a general idea of where they're going to be. Are they making the best of their day? But also, if something were to happen and we did not hear back from our advocate, we know where they're intended to be, and so that we can keep them safe. And then again, that shift report that we call it, that end of the shift check-in email, we have staff members that come in at 9 a.m. and we have staff that their last shift is at 8:30 in the evening. And so I can't see everybody all day, and so they do send me that email so that I know that they're back at the office, they're safe, everything is fine, and they're now going home for the day. So that daily communication email is really vital to a lot of things, kind of keeps management's kind of a finger on things so that we can see what the barriers are, but also making sure that the staff are staying safe, and then they have that ability to put those kinds of requests for maybe an additional supervision, or I need to talk to you about this client triggered me, or any of those kinds of things. So I would recommend that as well.
Great, thank you.
So, and another thing that we did, we recently just instituted, we had a kind of a non-utilized room in our office. It was kind of storage, and so we cleaned it out, and we just this week have offered now a relaxation room for our staff. A lot of the driving and things, their muscles are stiff, their necks, their shoulders. Again, it could be a very lonely job, so they are taking on a lot of things, and so we do have now a relaxation room where we just encourage our staff to go in for 15 minutes at a time and just kind of relax and decompress from their day. We have a stretching bar in there, we have some soft music, we have some coloring books, those kinds of things that they can just go in there and scream into a pillow if they need to, or cry for 15 minutes if they need to, and just kind of reconnect and regenerate themselves before they go on to that next client. So if you're able to do that, that would definitely be a staff perk that you could offer.
Okay, so hopefully we're not going to bore you with some VOCA tips, as the proposals can be, I know in our area, very cumbersome and very overwhelming at times. Some of the things that we've learned in the course of trying to make our VOCA applications fundable through mobile advocacy, because it was not necessarily a term or a service that was comfortable or familiar to them. So some of the things that we've learned that we're going to pass on to you is keeping track of both primary and secondary victims. So when mom comes in or dad comes in and they have children, enroll those kids. If they ever get into your van, you've provided a service. And so making sure that you're getting the true benefit of counting all of those encounters and making sure that you now have the ability to serve those children if and when the time comes up. And you're not having to stop what you're doing and process to create a packet or do an intake or do whatever evaluation that you're doing. So making sure that you're doing those things and you're making those services available right up front to every member of that victim survivor's family. Some of the other things, various victimizations are allowable. A lot of programs primarily focus on domestic violence victims, but know that you can now in this mobile project run across sexual assault victims, or if you're dealing with a family member as a secondary victim, like a child or a teen, maybe they're experiencing teen dating abuse, or maybe they're dealing with bullying at school. You can now address those things and make that part of your encompassing service delivery system. Don't be afraid in your proposals to ask for equipment. Let us not forget that this is the first time that this funder has tons of money, and I don't know about you, but in our area there are some unutilized funds. So don't be afraid to ask for equipment. It was kind of an interesting thing when we went mobile. One of the things is you have to pair an advocate with a vehicle. And so when we went to VOCA and we asked for our first proposal, it was around vans and people. And we were very fortunate to receive 8 vans that we were able to purchase with VOCA funds. And it became quite the talk of the state of Arizona that we were able to utilize the funding for those things. Don't forget that advocate needs lots of specialized equipment. Put it in your line item budgets. Include those locking totes that Marci mentioned earlier, the cell phones, the ongoing cell service, making sure that you're addressing a laptop that can do all kinds of fun and special things. And that includes the software and any kind of encryption process that you may need to do. And then don't forget that just because they're mobile, and this was a lesson learned, I will tell you, don't forget that just because they're mobile doesn't mean they don't need a desk and a chair. And VOCA can be quite literal. And so we actually did run across that. So making sure that you're thinking about that holistic process and making sure that you're putting all of those items in as line items. Remember the details when completing your budget. So now you've got them to pay for a van and an advocate and all of their fun tools and things. And don't forget to add in that AAA service. So when your advocate is out on the highway and they have a flat tire or they run out of gas, and yes, that might probably happen. And so they have someone that they can call because maybe their manager isn't able to get to them. You want them to be back on the road and safe in that vehicle as quickly as possible. So making sure that AAA coverage is included. And they did pay for that for us. Putting in a healthy vehicle maintenance fund and putting in for gas. Making sure that you are thinking about, I don't know if Georgia does multiple year contracts or single year contracts, but thinking about pay increases. Again, we mentioned this is a very strenuous and difficult and demanding position, so making sure that you're building in those pay increases over time to keep them motivated and to make sure that they feel recognized for the job that they're doing. And I know most of you probably already know this, match doesn't always mean money. So making sure that you're thinking about those partner site locations and those community partners that you're utilizing space in, that space can count towards your match requirement, not something that you have to pay out. Getting volunteers to provide direct service, as I'm sure you know, can also be allowable as match in the mobile program as well. Making sure that you're looking at other direct service vehicles that you have in your organization. Maybe you're a shelter and you want to add mobile as a component, and you have a van that's assigned to that shelter location for transportation. You can use that van and the services that it provides as leverage or as match in your mobile requests. And then again, we were very fortunate to be able to use match waivers. This was a very different program for Arizona and for our VOCA administrator. Arizona has not historically done a very good job of offering match waivers to their programs. And so it was something that we absolutely needed to have in order to make it happen because of the large numbers of staff and vans that we were asking for. And then the 100% staff funded. You know, it's really exciting when you see all those dollars and cents that are available to say, oh gosh, I want you to pay for 100% of Sally, Joe, and Susie too. But realizing that those 100% funded staff are going to be limited to only VOCA eligible service. So if there are other types of services that you want to provide, such as those food bags or those stops at the clothing store or some of those things, those will create barriers for you if you're doing 100% funding. So maybe looking at how to reallocate some of your existing funds to make that happen and possible. And don't forget, you can ask for consultants to be part of your budgets to help you with the startup assistance and to help you with staff training and getting your agency ready for mobile service. So just some of the things and the lessons that we've learned as we've been moving forward. Any questions about any of those or anything you want me to expound upon? Okay.
No questions have popped up. Yeah.
All right.
It's really great information.
All right. So don't reinvent the wheel. We're here. We'll be more than happy to help you out. And so if we can just indulge for just a moment, we are willing to provide roadside assistance. We can provide and assist you with staff training, with board training, with community partner developments. We are more than happy to help you with policy and procedure manual assistance, helping you create forms and documentation that will meet your needs and the needs of the funder, as they are different from walls to wheels. Looking at data collection and reporting changes that are a little bit more challenging in the mobile setting than they are in the standardized, everybody recognizes shelter kind of data collection. And then we're also willing to help out with some of the VOCA-specific assistance. I don't offer this very often, but we are certainly willing to assist with proposal preparation and your budgets and the measurements. Mobile service is very different, and so finding the wording and the justifications and being able to justify in your budgets why those specific items are necessary and can be quite costly. So looking at those justification definitions and how you term that can be quite challenging, and we're willing to help you do that and take a look at those and provide assistance. So one of the things that we put in here is if you need more than just a basic beginner stuff, we are willing to be outside professionals. You can put that into the outside other professional line item. You do that as the consulting fees, the $650 that is the allowable under VOCA, or the $325 for half day. We would be willing to come out and actually help you do your on-site training for your staff, your management, community, your board, whomever you need assistance in getting on board, or however you need to do that. We'd be more than happy to help you develop program materials and policies, and making sure that you're thinking about those safety status things and those confidentiality processes. And then again, doing the specific training on how to identify and serve victims, which is a key to VOCA terminology. The other thing that we are happy to do is just an hourly rate. If you want to put that in as a line item, we'd be happy to spend time with you and offer expertise in consulting on how to get some of those very same things done, but not necessarily as days or half days, but just as an as-needed kind of thing. So our staff training, we actually have an in-house 2-week training program here for all of our new mobile advocates. So if you're interested in that, you can actually put that in as a training component, and you could actually send your new mobile advocates here to travel with a seasoned advocate here and learn the tricks of the trade and how they do some of their day-to-day functions. So just something to think about if you're interested in having us come out and help you, or having some time over the phone to do some of those things. And then, like I said, we'd be happy to look at your proposals. We'll do that at no cost to you, just to help you. We are so excited about this model and so excited about the potential that it has created for serving victims of so many different types of crimes in our locations, that we want you to be successful in expanding and creating mobile advocacy units in Georgia, wherever you may be. And so if you want help, if you want assistance in just running it by somebody who's already sold it a couple of times, send it over to us. We'll be happy to take a quick look, to offer you some suggestions, pencil in some things that maybe you forgot in your budgets, and we'll certainly share any stats that we may have for your needs assessment. So making sure that you realize that we're not expecting you to learn it all by yourself. If you're fully capable of it, great, wonderful, welcome aboard, and we hope to talk to you soon and often. If you're not, we're here to help you if we can as well. So certainly something to think about as you wish. When we were doing this, we wished that we would have had some of these services available to us. Unfortunately, we did not find anybody doing this kind of work at that time, and so recognizing that there is a true value to learning from somebody who's already walked in the program. And then to wrap it up, any questions, comments, anything that you would like to ask that maybe weren't in the slides that we provided or in the information that we covered? We're certainly willing to take any off-the-cuff questions at this time.
One question about the partner sites. I was just wondering if you could share some tips or some examples of how you were able to establish those relationships with those partner sites to have meetings or use space on a consistent basis. I know I've heard from programs, it can be challenging to find a spot that's really willing to work with us, and so I was wondering if you could expand just a little bit on that.
Sure, I can take that. I think I would encourage you, and something again that we've learned along the way, is to maybe look outside your social service community and maybe reaching out to those other programs that are offering other types of service. For example, we are in a couple of community centers that offer housing vouchers, and they offer disability DDD kind of services. I'm sure I don't know the relatable terms for your programs there, but they offer a wide range of other types of social services, and they welcomed us. They were begging for us to come, and they want us to be there more often than I'm able to provide because they have clients coming in who are needing a housing voucher, who are needing a food box, who are needing those kinds of things, and they're also mentioning their violence, and their staff do not know what to do. They don't know how to refer them, and so they were really excited about us being able to come in and offer that. So we are looking at community centers. If you have a very active church in your community, that would be another recommendation, especially that we started out with. Those kinds of places. If you're looking at a higher risk client, you really want to start making some connections with your police departments, as we do utilize police departments as a meeting location, because they often do have a community room, if that's something that you feel like would be appropriate for your community. So those are some of the kinds of places. We have a women's resource program here in Phoenix that is very popular in the area, is very well known, and we offer classes there 4 days a week. And so we're able to not only provide our support groups in that location, but we also get to talk to a lot of their social workers, a lot of their other group presenters, and so all of that networking just continues to kind of go around in the Bend that way. And in our rural programs, again, we were looking at non-social service type agencies. Of course, we can't co-locate within a shelter because the client couldn't go to that location. So we're looking at the DA's office provided us with a room in their office once a week. Again, welcomed arms, because we can take that client to those meetings, whereas before, they would continually get cancellations or no-shows because the client just couldn't make it to that office. We had a partnership with the water department. They had an office and they had a room, and every once a month they do a food bank, and they said, sure, you can have the room on the other day, and so they gave us space there. So kind of thinking outside of the box of your normal typical partners that you may have now, and just try and see what else is in your community and who else may be willing. We have private business owners that have offered. We have banks that have given us their conference room that they don't need. There's lots of folks in your community who want to help and want to support the movement. They just don't know how, and they really respond well to, and they feel really grateful to be able to participate in that way. And so just don't be afraid to ask. Just reach out, send your emails, send your advocates out when they're doing outreach, talking to people. They're mobile. They could do some of that legwork where the manager doesn't always have to be the one that makes those calls. Those advocates go out, they pass out their flyers, they make a few comments, and if the business owner or that program provider sounds interested, they give them my information, and then we connect those dots from there. So yeah, that would be what I would recommend. That was a great question. Yes.
Perfect. That's great. Great ideas. And we had another question, and this is something that we were talking about offline before we started the session, so I'm glad this came up around getting parental consent to work with teens. I know you were talking about how your work with teens is still new and evolving, but if you could share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Sure. We do have our youth program, and so in that program we have what we call secondaries. So if we have a primary victim of abuse that comes in and he or she wants their child to enroll, they get their own advocate, and so that is their youth advocate in that program, and they meet with them ideally in conjunction with their adult advocate, so that the family only has to have that meeting one time. But then we also reach out to primary victims. Generally, we're seeing that's going to be a sexual assault or a teen dating violent victim. We do, at this time, require parent permission. That is something that is my goal, hopefully in the future, to not have to allow, because we are seeing that as a barrier for the teens, whereas sometimes it is the parent who is the one creating some difficulty in their life, and so by requesting that information could be challenging. But as of right now, we do require a parent permission slip in order for the child to, or the teen, to enter into our youth program. And then again, it's modeled exactly after our adult program, and so they meet as often as the child is interested. There's generally a lot more texting that's involved in that relationship, Facebook messaging and those kinds of things. But in those situations, we do reach out to group homes. We talk to our DCS workers, which is our Child Protective Agency here in Arizona. We reach out to charter schools and public schools. Public schools we tend to find are a little bit more difficult in order for us to get into. The charter schools, literally the principal handed us a key and said, you can have this classroom any day of the week that you want. Please come here and help our kids. And so there's a huge benefit to this program. It's a huge need, of course. There are still some sticky situations when it comes to the legalities and it comes to minor abuse and those kinds of things that we're still wading through. And so that's why we kind of call this program still in the building phase, as we're still trying to work out some of those kinks and hope to make some legislative changes so we can get the rights of our minors. We even recently were able to get an order of protection without her parent involved, because she was a ward of the state, and there was a whole bureaucratic issue with all of that. And so we had a very sympathetic and like-minded judge who did offer that order of protection with just our minor and our advocate in the room. And so that was definitely a huge win for us, in our opinion, and so shows that need. So if you're able to do that service, we highly recommend it, and please stay in contact with us so that we can learn from one another, because it is going to be a tricky road.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. We certainly experience similar challenges in working with teens. So yeah, we appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So any other questions from anybody? That is all of the questions that I have in right now.
All right. Well, you guys have our contact information up on the screen here, and so if you guys have any other questions, you think of anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to know what you guys are doing. If you decide to go mobile or not, we really want to kind of stay on top of how things are working. Everybody puts their own spin on it, and so we would be able to learn from you just as well as you could learn from us. And so please stay in touch. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, and thank you both so much for sharing this information with us and your willingness to provide so much support and technical assistance to programs that are thinking about doing this. That's really incredible, and shows how passionate you are about this work and how successful I think it's been for you. And I hope that we will have some programs here that will consider looking at similar services. And I also want to share that Laura and Marci are going to be here in Atlanta. Did you say in July? Is that
yes,
right?
Yes, that's correct.
For a conference. And so they have offered to connect with anyone who is interested in applying for funding to do mobile advocacy if you'd like to have a Q&A session or something like that. So I will follow up in the email that I send out with a survey and a copy of the slides and all that good stuff. Just add that question so that I can, please send me your feedback. If you're interested in having a Q&A session or something like that, we can look at how we can coordinate with them when they're here. So I'm excited and hope I get to meet you guys when you're here visiting.
Gosh, we hope so too, Alexis. It's been wonderful getting to know you through the technology systems.
Yes. Thank goodness for technology. Yeah. All right. Well, we will go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Laura and Marci. And yeah, we will send out that email soon.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.